They cuffed a Navy SEAL sniper in court. Not because she did anything wrong, but because they couldn't believe who she was. San Diego County Superior Court, Tuesday morning. The air outside was dry and sharp. It had rained overnight, but by 9 o'clock a.m., the sun was back to doing what it always did in Southern California, burning through everything. Naomi Prescott stepped out of her rental car wearing dark jeans, a plain black blouse, and her Navy-issued watch. Her braided bun was neat and high. No makeup, just her. She walked with a quiet purpose, like someone who had been trained to avoid wasting motion. She wasn't trying to be intimidating, but she carried herself with the kind of stillness that made people instinctively move out of the way. And yet, that morning, the second she stepped through the courthouse doors, it started. A security guard leaned toward his colleague and muttered something. Naomi noticed. She always noticed. She'd been trained for that too. Situational awareness, a skill drilled into her long before she ever touched a sniper rifle. She stepped up to the security checkpoint. "Ma'am, you'll need to take off your watch and belt," the first officer said. "No belt," she said, voice level. "The watch doesn't come off. Military issue." "You'll need to take it off," he repeated a little louder. She didn't argue. She unstrapped it slowly and placed it in the tray. He squinted at the engraved text. USS Hopper, Bravo Detachment, 0105. Then he looked at her, really looked. "You military?" "Yes," she said simply. "What branch?" "Navy." "You active?" "Lieutenant Commander." He chuckled. "You don't look like it." Naomi didn't flinch. She just stared at him, steady. "I'm here for my brother's arraignment. I'm a witness." He nodded slowly, but she could feel the wheels turning behind his eyes. By the time she was cleared through security, a bailiff, white, about late 50s, with a badge that looked like it had been shined that morning, was already watching her from the hallway. Naomi walked past him, silent. She sat on the bench outside courtroom 3A. 30 seconds later, he approached. "Ma'am, I'm gonna need to see some ID." She showed him her military credentials. He frowned. "This ain't base. Got any real ID?" "That is real ID. Step up, please." "I'm not under arrest," she said calmly. "I said step up." She looked him in the eye. "I'm a federal witness. You can check with—" He cut her off. "I said get up, now." He already had his hand on the cuffs. She didn't move. "I don't want to escalate this," she said evenly, "but what you're doing is not procedure." By now, people in the hallway were watching. The receptionist peeked through the glass. A teenage boy pulled out his phone. The bailiff stepped in close. "Look, either you come with me easy, or I take you down right here. Your choice." And before she could even say another word, he spun her around. Cold metal snapped around her wrists. Gasps echoed down the hallway. She didn't resist, didn't raise her voice. But the shame and the rage cut through her like shrapnel. She was cuffed, in public, with her back to the wall, her arms locked behind her, and her ID badge on the floor. Naomi Prescott stood still. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just stood. Every eye in that hallway felt like it was trying to burn a hole through her. But she stood anyway. And when the bailiff muttered, "That's what I thought," under his breath, she didn't blink. Because she'd heard worse. Much worse. But inside that courtroom, the real storm was just starting to build. Inside courtroom 3A, things were already behind schedule. Naomi's younger brother, Darius Prescott, sat at the defendant's table with his public defender, looking like he hadn't slept in days. 24 years old, too smart for the choices he'd made, and too angry at the world to admit when he needed help. He turned his head, waiting for Naomi to come in. She had promised she'd be there. He needed her there. Instead, the doors opened, and in came the bailiff, holding Naomi by the cuffs. The courtroom went dead quiet. Even the judge, a heavy-set man in his 60s with liver spots and thick glasses, looked up from his bench, confused. "What's going on?" he asked. The bailiff cleared his throat. "Brought in a suspicious individual loitering near the courtroom, wouldn't identify herself properly, claimed to be military. She had no official civilian ID." Naomi stood tall, her wrists behind her back, eyes scanning the room. Darius blinked. "Wait, what? That's my sister." The judge squinted. "Is this true?" "She's my witness," Darius said. "She came here for me." The public defender stood up quickly. Your Honor, this is Lieutenant Commander Naomi Prescott. She's here to testify in support of my client's character. She's an active duty Navy officer. This is clearly a misunderstanding. The judge raised an eyebrow. Lieutenant Commander? Naomi finally spoke. Yes, sir. United States Navy. SEAL Team 5, ID badge was taken when I was cuffed. The courtroom shifted. Someone in the gallery whispered, She's a SEAL? The judge leaned back, as if trying to process the gap between what he saw and what he heard. The bailiff looked uncomfortable now, but he didn't let go. She wouldn't comply, sir. She was standing in the hallway and refused to show proper ID. She showed her military credentials, said the public defender. She said she's a SEAL, the bailiff snapped. Come on, I've seen Navy SEALs before. The judge said nothing. Naomi stepped forward. Respectfully, I don't need to look like your idea of a SEAL to be one. I completed BUDS in 2012, deployed 5 times, Bronze Star, Navy and Marine Corps Commendation Medal. You can confirm it with the Department of Defense. The judge looked at the clerk, then the bailiff, then back to Naomi. Take off the cuffs. Sir, I said take them off, now. The bailiff hesitated. Then he slowly stepped forward and removed the cuffs from Naomi's wrists. The click of the metal was the only sound in the room. She didn't rub her wrists, didn't flinch. The judge cleared his throat. Ms. Prescott, I apologize. I wasn't made aware of your presence in advance. That's fine, she said quietly. I wasn't expecting a red carpet. Darius stood up at the defense table, shaking his head. They cuffed you for what? Naomi turned to him, her voice low but firm. Let's just get through today. We can talk later. But even as she took her seat in the front row, the tension didn't leave. Because no matter how many medals she had, no matter what she wore or how calm she stayed, someone still looked at her and thought, who do you think you are? But the answer to that question was about to walk through the courtroom doors. The courtroom moved on, but barely. People kept looking at Naomi, whispering, some with curiosity, others with disbelief. A woman in the back row leaned toward the man next to her and whispered something with a half smile, like she couldn't imagine someone like Naomi doing anything military-related besides typing at a desk. Naomi stayed seated, straight-backed, silent. Darius kept glancing at her. His leg bounced under the table, not from nerves about the charges, but about what they'd just seen happen to his sister. He wanted to say something, but he knew better. Your Honor, the prosecutor began, standing up with a folder in hand, we'd like to argue that the defendant, Mr. Prescott, poses a continued risk to the community. He's already on probation for prior infractions. That was a parking violation, Darius muttered under his breath, and has displayed multiple instances of non-compliance with court orders. Naomi stood up, calmly. Permission to speak, Your Honor? The judge looked up quickly. You're not a party to the proceedings. I'm the defense's key witness. You'll speak when you're called. She held his stare. The prosecutor turned, annoyed. Is this going to be a pattern today? The judge tapped his gavel once. Order. Lieutenant Commander, you'll wait for your turn. Naomi didn't sit right away. Not out of defiance, but because she was weighing something. People in her world got killed for hesitation. But this wasn't Afghanistan. This was a courtroom. And in here, you weren't allowed to move until someone told you to. She slowly sat down. A woman 2 seats over leaned in, trying to whisper, You really a sniper? Naomi didn't look at her. She's not answering you, said a man behind them. You really think she's lying? I just don't get why she's so quiet, the woman whispered. If that was me, I'd be yelling at everybody. Naomi finally turned, looked her dead in the eye. That's why you're not me. The woman shrank into her seat. The court resumed, but tension floated in the air like it was nailed to the ceiling. Every time Naomi moved, people tracked her like she might pull a grenade out of her purse. Every time she shifted in her seat, the bailiff, still standing near the wall, subtly adjusted his belt. She noticed. Of course she noticed, but she didn't give them a show. Darius watched it all, jaw tight. He turned to his lawyer. Why isn't anyone saying anything about what just happened out there? The lawyer whispered, because the system doesn't stop to clean up its messes. It just keeps going. A moment later, the judge looked down at a sheet of paper just handed to him. His expression changed. Slightly. like a pin dropped inside his chest and he was trying to ignore it. He glanced back up at Naomi, then back at the paper. He cleared his throat. Before we proceed, can someone explain why there's a visitor from the Department of Defense listed on our court docket with no timestamp? The clerk looked up, confused. A visitor? The doors at the back of the courtroom creaked open. No one spoke. Naomi turned her head, and in walked someone they never expected to see, and especially not here. But when a 4-star admiral walks into a civilian courtroom unannounced, people start paying attention real fast. At first, nobody said a word. Not the judge, not the lawyers, not the audience. Because when Admiral Russell Kincaid stepped through those doors, in full uniform, medals and all, it was like someone had dropped a thunderclap inside the courtroom. He didn't look left or right. He didn't need to. Everyone already knew who he was. Tall, broad-shouldered, silver-haired, and built like a linebacker who'd aged into strategy. His presence wasn't loud, but it didn't have to be. He walked straight to the front row, paused just behind Naomi, then turned to the judge. "Your Honor," he said, his voice low but steady. "I apologize for the interruption, but I believe one of my officers is in your courtroom." The judge looked stunned. "Yes, Lieutenant Commander Prescott." Kincaid nodded once. "Correct, I'm here on her behalf." The prosecutor stood up, clearly unsettled. "And may I ask why?" "I was informed," Kincaid said without raising his voice, "that she was placed in handcuffs this morning, in a public hallway, without cause." No one answered. Kincaid turned to Naomi. "You all right, Lieutenant Commander?" "Yes, sir." "Did you resist?" "No, sir." He turned back to the judge. "And yet she was restrained like a suspect, despite carrying federal credentials and being listed as a witness." The judge cleared his throat again, fumbling with his robe. "Admiral, I assure you, this wasn't intentional. There was some confusion." "Confusion," Kincaid repeated. Not a question, just a word dropped into the middle of the room like a challenge. He stepped toward the bailiff. "What was confusing about this?" The bailiff shifted. I was doing my job, sir. She didn't present a state ID." "She's not required to. You're looking at one of the most qualified snipers this country has produced in the last 20 years. You cuffed her in a hallway for sitting quietly." Naomi's eyes were locked on the floor, not because she felt shame, but because she didn't want anyone to see the heat rising in her throat. Kincaid turned again, this time addressing the whole courtroom. "Let me say this plain. Lieutenant Commander Prescott didn't just earn her place in the teams. She bled for it. She's led operations overseas, carried men twice her weight out of active fire, and made shots under pressure most of us couldn't make standing still on a calm range." Now everyone was listening. He pointed gently toward Naomi. "But none of that mattered out there, did it?" Dead silence. "Because she didn't walk in wearing a uniform. She walked in wearing skin that made someone uncomfortable." The judge shifted uncomfortably. "Admiral, we deeply regret what happened, and I think I speak for the court when I say—" "I'm not asking for regret," Kincaid interrupted. "I'm asking what you're going to do about it." He let that hang. The courtroom was frozen. Kincaid glanced at Naomi, then gently stepped back. The judge looked rattled. "Lieutenant Commander Prescott, would you be willing to continue with your testimony?" Naomi stood, slowly. "I will, but not until the man who cuffed me apologizes. To me, in front of this courtroom." All eyes turned to the bailiff. He hesitated. Then, without a word, he walked toward her. His face was tight, voice low. "I'm sorry, ma'am." Naomi looked at him. No anger, no sarcasm, just a firm reply. "Don't call me ma'am to smooth it over. You can call me Lieutenant Commander." But what Naomi was about to share in that courtroom would cut deeper than any rank ever could. The judge nodded stiffly. "Lieutenant Commander Prescott, the floor is yours." Naomi stepped forward, past the defense table, past her brother, past the man who had cuffed her. The silence followed her all the way to the witness stand. She raised her right hand, swore in, sat down. Then she looked straight at the jury. "My name is Naomi Prescott. I've served in the United States Navy for nearly 15 years. I'm a sniper with SEAL Team 5. I'm also the older sister of the man sitting at that table right there." She gestured to Darius, who didn't lift his head, not out of shame, but out of weight. I'm not here to cover for him, she continued. I'm here to tell you the truth. The truth about who he is, what he's done, and why he deserves a chance to do better. She took a slow breath. When our mom died, Darius was 15. I was 22. I was just starting out in the Navy. I wanted to come home. I wasn't allowed to. I missed her funeral. He never forgave me for that. Her voice didn't waver, but the air in the room felt tighter. After that, he started slipping. Wrong friends, wrong places, but he never stopped being smart, never stopped being good, even when he didn't know how to show it. She paused. Let the silence settle. I've seen a lot of people run from danger, she said. My brother ran into it, not on a battlefield, but in real life. He got arrested trying to stop his friend from getting jumped. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong skin. They cuffed both of them. Someone in the back of the courtroom whispered something. Naomi ignored it. I'm not here to beg. I'm not here to blame. I'm here to ask that this court see him, not as a number or a case file or a statistic, but as a person. A man who screwed up, yeah, but not someone beyond repair. She shifted in her seat slightly. You know what happens when I walk into a room in uniform? No one answered. People salute, people listen, sometimes they even smile. But when I walk in wearing jeans, a hoodie, something changes. I become a question mark, a threat, a problem to be solved instead of a person to be understood. Naomi looked directly at the bailiff. I've been called ma'am, and ma'am only when it suited the moment. The rest of the time, I'm just that woman, or worse. She let it sit. But let me tell you what makes a soldier or a citizen. It's not what they wear, it's what they carry. I carry discipline, integrity, loyalty, and pain. My brother, he carries a lot too, more than you see in a police report. She paused, looked back at Darius. He was finally looking up. I'm not asking this court to erase his mistakes. I'm asking that you don't erase him. The judge stared down at the bench. The prosecutor didn't move. Even the stenographer stopped typing for a moment. The public defender spoke softly. Thank you, Lieutenant Commander. Naomi stood up, her hands clenched for a second, not in anger, but in control. Years of learning when to speak and when to stay quiet. This time, she chose both. She turned toward the judge. By the way, I wasn't late this morning. I got here early. I sat on that bench because I wanted to gather my thoughts. The only reason I walked into this courtroom in cuffs is because someone made a decision based on fear, not facts. She stepped down. Admiral Kincaid gave her a slight nod. She returned it. Then she walked past the jury box, past the clerk, and took her seat again. No one said a word, but the silence wasn't discomfort anymore. It was respect and reckoning. The court recessed for lunch, but no one left right away. The judge disappeared into his chambers without making eye contact. The prosecutor sat still, flipping through the same 2 pages in his binder. Even the jury remained seated longer than usual, like they didn't want to be the first ones to move. Naomi sat beside Darius. Neither of them spoke for a full minute. Then, I didn't ask you to do all that, he said, still looking straight ahead. I know, she replied. I'm not a hero, Naomi. She turned to him, voice low. Neither am I. I'm just the one who got through. He swallowed hard. His hands were shaking just slightly. They were going to throw me in county for this. I know, she said again, and maybe you still have to go, but you won't go alone. Darius looked at her, searching her face for something. Anger, disappointment, pity. He found none of it, just calm. Why'd he come? He asked. The Admiral? Naomi leaned back. Because I called him. Darius raised an eyebrow. You called a 4-star Admiral to come to my hearing? He called me first. He heard what happened outside the courtroom, said he was already in town, told me, if they're going to drag my seal through the mud, they'll have to look me in the eye when they do it. Darius gave a half laugh. I didn't even know you had people like that. Naomi looked over at him. Neither did I, until I needed them. Across the room, the bailiff stood near the exit, pretending to scroll on his phone. But he wasn't fooling anyone. He kept glancing toward Naomi. He wasn't afraid anymore, just unsure. like he was slowly realizing that the woman he'd put in cuffs that morning had stood on more dirt than he'd ever read about. Outside the courtroom, reporters were starting to gather. Someone must have leaked the name. It didn't take long to find out who Naomi Prescott was once people started asking questions. A woman from a local news station was already rehearsing her segment on the courthouse steps. Naomi saw none of it. She sat still, elbows on her knees, watching Darius mess with the cuff of his sleeve like he was trying to avoid unraveling. "I didn't want you to see me like this," he muttered. Naomi didn't blink. "I've seen you at your worst. And I still came. That's what family does. Real family." He looked at her. "And what about when you're the one hurting?" She smiled for the first time all day. "Then I show up for myself. Same way I showed up for you." There was a long pause between them. Not heavy, not dramatic, just necessary. Then Darius leaned forward, his voice barely above a whisper. "You think they would have cuffed you if you were a white dude in uniform?" Naomi didn't answer right away. She didn't need to. But the real answer wasn't in words. It was in the courtroom's silence and the weight of every look she'd been given that morning. Naomi didn't speak much during the break, but in her head, she was replaying things. Not just from the morning, but from years back. Bud's training, Coronado, week 3, cold water, sand in her boots. The sound of a whistle that never came when she wanted it, and always came when she was just about to catch her breath. She remembered the instructor who pulled her aside after a brutal swim. He didn't yell, didn't insult her, just looked her dead in the eye and said, "You know they didn't build this place for people like you, right?" She had nodded. She already knew. She'd always known. She made it through anyway, not because she had something to prove, but because she wasn't willing to let the world shrink her into someone she wasn't. Naomi had fought on 3 continents, provided overwatch on missions no civilian would ever hear about. She'd buried friends, worn their patches on her chest until the threads wore thin. And yet, this morning, none of that mattered. To that bailiff, she wasn't a leader, or an operator, or even a woman with a name. She was just another body on a bench. It had taken her 20 minutes to get through training drills that would break most men, but less than 20 seconds for someone to decide she didn't belong in a hallway. She wore 2 uniforms, one that came with medals, the other she was born into. And the truth was, only one of those ever seemed to matter when people looked at her. The courtroom was back in session. This time, when Naomi walked in, no one avoided eye contact. No one asked to see her ID. The bailiff stayed on the opposite end of the room. The judge cleared his throat and announced the court was reconvened. Darius stood up next to his lawyer. His voice was steadier now. "Your Honor, I'd like to speak before sentencing." The judge paused, surprised, then nodded. Darius stepped forward. He didn't read from a paper, didn't rehearse it in his head. "I've spent a lot of time trying to prove I'm not what people expect me to be. And it's hard, because sometimes I mess up. I get angry. I don't think. I say things I regret. But none of that means I'm not worth something." He looked at Naomi. "My sister didn't have to come here. She didn't have to say anything. But she did, because that's what she's always done. She shows up, even when people don't." He turned back to the judge. "I know I messed up, but if you're going to judge me, judge all of me, not just the worst part." The room stayed still, and for the first time all day, Naomi saw something shift in the judge's face, not regret, not guilt, just understanding. The judge leaned forward. "Thank you, Mr. Prescott. I'll take that into consideration." He looked over at Naomi. "Lieutenant Commander Prescott, this court recognizes your service, both to your country and your family." Naomi gave a slight nod. "Thank you, Your Honor." But inside, she wasn't looking for recognition. She was looking for change. Because respect after the fact is easy, but justice, real justice, shows up before the damage is done. The next morning, Naomi was on the tarmac at Naval Base Point Loma. She had a deployment briefing in 20 minutes. She stood near her Jeep, sipping lukewarm coffee from a dented thermos. Same one she'd carried in Iraq, in Syria, in Djibouti. Same one that had been in her bag yesterday when she got cuffed outside a courtroom 2 miles from where she stood now. Admiral Kincaid walked up beside her, hands behind his back. "You good?" he asked. Naomi nodded. "Always." He gave her a look. "No, you're not." She smiled. "Okay, I'm tired." He nodded. You earned it. That was bigger than I expected. Naomi didn't say anything. Kincaid looked out at the airstrip. You know, I got calls from 2 federal judges last night. One of them said he watched the video footage, asked if he could send it to a training academy. Training for what? She asked. For learning how to shut up and listen. Naomi chuckled. He looked at her, serious again. You did something most people in uniform never do. You spoke up while still in it, took off the armor and said what needed saying. I wasn't trying to make a statement. You didn't have to, he said. You were the statement. They stood in silence for a second. Then he said, I put in for a commendation, not for your past deployments, for yesterday. Naomi shook her head. Don't need it. You don't, he agreed. But the next girl coming behind you, she might. She turned and looked at him, finally letting herself breathe all the way in. Sir, she said, you know what I kept thinking yesterday? What's that? If I hadn't stood up for myself in that courtroom, I would have been just another woman they wrote off. Another file. Another face no one remembered. Kincaid nodded. But now they'll remember. She looked down at her hands. No cuffs, just skin, just strength. Back at the courthouse, the bailiff had been reassigned. The judge issued a public statement acknowledging procedural bias. And Naomi, she didn't show up on the news. She didn't post about it. But stories move. People talk. And the video of her standing there in cuffs, calm, unshaken, proud, had already started circulating. No hashtags, no press team, just truth. Naomi climbed into her Jeep, started the engine. Kincaid stepped back, gave her a small nod. Stay sharp out there, he said. She smiled. Always do. And with that, she pulled off. One wheel in the dirt, the other already rolling back into the work ahead. Because for Naomi Prescott, this wasn't the end of the story. It was just one more page in a book still being written. And maybe, just maybe, someone else would read it and remember. Justice isn't just about what the law says. It's about how people are treated when no one's watching. It's about who speaks up when everyone else stays seated. And it's about how you carry yourself, not just when the world salutes you, but when it handcuffs you too. Because strength isn't just surviving a war. It's surviving the moment when your own country forgets you fought one. If you made it this far, don't let the story stop here. Speak up. Stand with those who are silenced. And if you ever find yourself sitting quietly while someone else gets cuffed for showing up, ask yourself, what would Naomi Prescott do?